She took a dying cowboy's name before sundown. Then a hidden letter changed everything. The first thing the dying cowboy asked Ruth Caldwell for was not water, prayer, or forgiveness. He asked her to marry him before sunset. Outside the upstairs room of the Cedar Hollow boarding house, a hard November wind shook the windows and sent dust whispering beneath the door. A horse shifted against the hitching rail below. Somewhere across the street, a loose sign knocked against the blacksmith shop with the slow beat of a funeral drum. Ruth stood beside the bed, with both hands folded over her worn gray skirt. Caleb Mercer looked like a man already halfway gone. His face was pale beneath several days of dark beard, and each breath came with a quiet struggle. A timber beam had fallen across him when his barn roof gave way during a storm. Dr. Amos Reed had set the broken ribs, but fever had followed. That morning, the doctor had told Ruth that Caleb might have 3 days. He might not have one. "I know how it sounds," Caleb said. His voice was low and rough, yet his eyes were clear. Ruth looked toward the small chair near the window. A girl of 8 sat there holding a cloth doll with one missing button eye. Her name was Lucy Mercer. She had not spoken since Ruth entered the room. She only watched. Children who had already lost one parent learned quickly when the second might be taken. "You sent for the wrong woman," Ruth said. "No," Caleb's trembling hand tightened over the blanket. "I sent for the only woman in Cedar Hollow who might understand." Ruth felt an old pain stir beneath her ribs. 4 years earlier, she had stood beside another bed and watched her husband die from a winter illness in Kansas. After that, she had traveled west with a trunk, a sewing box, and the foolish hope that distance could make grief smaller. It had not. It had only made grief quieter. Caleb glanced at Lucy. "Her mother's brother is coming." "Why?" "To take her." Lucy lowered her eyes to the doll. Caleb continued. "Sila's Crow owns half the water right south of Santa Fe. He believes money makes him fit to decide where every person belongs. He never approved of his sister marrying me. After she died, he offered to take Lucy. I refused. And now he knows you are sick." "He knows more than that." Caleb swallowed and closed his eyes until the pain passed. "He has already sent a lawyer." Ruth stepped closer to the bed. Dust clung to the toes of her boots from the walk through town. "What does any of this have to do with marrying me?" "If I die unmarried, Silas will tell the court Lucy has no proper home. He will say my ranch is failing. He will say a hired hand and a child cannot keep it. He will call her an orphan and carry her away before the ground over me turns cold." Ruth's gaze moved back to the girl. Lucy's fingers had tightened around the doll's faded dress. "A marriage will not make me her mother," Ruth said. "It will make you her legal guardian if the papers are signed properly. Dr. Reed has drawn up a will. The land, the cattle, and the house would pass into your care for Lucy. Silas could still fight, but he would not be fighting a dead man's empty house. He would be facing my wife." The word settled heavily between them. Wife. Ruth had once believed that word meant warmth at the supper table, muddy boots by the door, and someone breathing beside her through the night. Then it had come to mean a black dress, unpaid bills, and neighbors who stopped visiting once the sympathy ran out. "You do not know me," she said. "I know you returned Mrs. Pritchard's money when she paid you twice for a dress. That proves I can count. I know you carried food to the Miller children when their father broke his leg. That proves I can cook. I know Lucy follows you with her eyes whenever you pass the schoolhouse." For the first time, Ruth looked directly at the child. Lucy looked away, but not fast enough. Caleb drew a careful breath. "And I know you understand what it means to lose someone and still get up the next morning." Ruth's mouth tightened. "That does not mean I am fit to raise a child. No one fit for it ever believes they are." A gust pressed against the window. The lantern flame bent and straightened again. Ruth walked to the washstand and poured water into a chipped cup. She held it while Caleb drank, watching the effort it cost him. When he finished, he pointed weakly toward the small table beside the bed. A folded document lay there beside a silver pocket watch and a sealed blue envelope. "The marriage agreement is written down," he said. "You keep your own money. You control the house if I die. Lucy's inheritance cannot be sold without your consent. If I live, the marriage remains real unless you choose to leave after 1 year." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You planned even for living." "I do not expect it." "But you planned for it. I will not trap you with a miracle." She almost laughed, though nothing in the room was funny. Then she noticed the name written across the blue envelope. "Mrs. Ruth Mercer." The letters were in Caleb's hand. "You wrote my married name before asking me." His face changed. For the first time, fear entered his eyes. "That letter is not for now." "What is in it?" "Something you must know if I survive." Ruth stared at him. "And if you die?" "Burn it without opening it." The wind struck the house again. Lucy's doll slipped from her lap and landed softly on the floor. Ruth bent to pick it up. As she handed it back, Lucy caught her sleeve with 2 small fingers. "Mr. Crow says Papa stole me," the girl whispered. Caleb tried to rise, but pain forced him back against the pillows. Ruth knelt beside Lucy. "Did he say that to you?" The child nodded. "He said when Papa dies, nobody will stop him." Something cold moved through Ruth that had nothing to do with the weather. She stood and faced Caleb. "Where is the preacher?" Caleb's eyes searched hers. "At the church hall preparing to leave town." "Then send for him." Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb did not look relieved. He looked almost ashamed. "Ruth, before you agree, there is one more thing." His gaze shifted to the blue envelope. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Then came 3 slow knocks at the door. Dr. Reed entered without waiting. His hat was wet with mist, and his face had lost all color. "Caleb," he said, "Silas Crow's stage arrived early." From the street below came the sound of several horses stopping at once. Ruth moved to the window. A tall man in a black coat stepped down from a polished carriage. Beside him stood a deputy and a stranger carrying a leather case. The stranger looked up at the boarding house window, as though he already knew which room held the dying man. Dr. Reed closed the door behind him. "They have a court order," he said. "They came to take Lucy today." For one long second, nobody in the room moved. Then Lucy slid from the chair and ran to Caleb's bed. "No," she said, pressing herself against his side. "Papa, don't let them take me." Caleb tried to lift an arm around her, but the effort pulled pain across his face. "They won't," he said, though his voice was too weak to carry much promise. Below, boots struck the boarding house steps. Ruth looked from the window to Dr. Reed. "Can they enter without Caleb's consent?" The doctor removed his spectacles and wiped them with a handkerchief. "The order says Lucy is to be placed in Silas Crow's care until a judge reviews Caleb's ability to provide for her." "I am still alive," Caleb said. "The order was signed yesterday," Dr. Reed replied. "Silas claimed you were too sick to speak for yourself." Caleb's jaw tightened. Ruth crossed to the table and picked up the marriage agreement. "Does this change anything?" "It might," the doctor said. "Once the marriage is legal, you become part of Lucy's household. But the preacher has to perform the vows, the witnesses have to sign, and the record must be filed." "How long?" "The county clerk is in Mesa Verde, 2 hours by wagon in good weather." The door shook under a hard knock. "Open in the name of the territorial court," a man called. Lucy buried her face against Caleb's chest. Ruth looked at Dr. Reed. "Where is the preacher now?" Reverend Hale was loading his wagon behind the church hall. "Bring him." Dr. Reed hesitated. "They will not wait politely downstairs." "Then do not use the stairs." His eyes moved toward the window. The roof of the livery stable stood close enough for a careful man to cross from the boarding house porch awning. Beyond it, a narrow alley led toward the church. Dr. Reed put on his hat. I am too old for this. You are younger than Caleb will be if you do nothing, Ruth said. The doctor gave her a sharp look, then opened the window and climbed out. Another knock struck the door. Caleb Mercer, the voice called. This is Deputy Warren, open the door. Caleb looked at Ruth. You do not owe us this. I know. You can still walk away. I know that too. Then why are you still standing here? Ruth glanced at Lucy. The girl was shaking, though she made no sound. Because no child should have to wait beside a sickbed and wonder which stranger will own her by nightfall. The door handle turned. Ruth pushed a chair beneath it. Caleb watched her with a look she could not read. You have done this before, he said. Blocked a deputy from entering a sick room. Made a decision before fear had time to stop you. Ruth faced the door. Fear has stopped me often enough. The man outside knocked again. Mrs. Caldwell, Deputy Warren said, we know you are in there. This order does not concern you. It concerns me now, Ruth answered. A colder voice spoke from the hallway. Not yet, it doesn't. Silas Crow. Even through the closed door, his words carried the calm of a man used to being obeyed. Ruth Caldwell, he continued, you have lived in Cedar Hollow less than 6 months. You have no family here and no property. Do not attach yourself to a dying man's trouble. Caleb's hand curled into the quilt. Silas knew who she was. That unsettled Ruth more than his threat. How much did you pay to learn about me? She asked. Enough to know you are a widow with debts. Ruth's face went still. The debt was small but private. Money borrowed for her husband's burial. Money she had spent 4 years trying to repay. Silas spoke again. Open the door. I will settle what you owe and see that you have safe passage back to Kansas. Ruth felt Caleb watching her. Lucy lifted her face from the bed. The offer hung in the room like smoke. A clean escape. No sick man, no frightened child, no ranch near ruin, no powerful enemy waiting outside. For a moment Ruth saw the life she might return to, a rented room, sewing until her fingers cramped, quiet meals, no one needing her enough to break her heart. She walked to the door. Caleb closed his eyes. Ruth leaned close to the wood. Mr. Crow, she said, a person who buys obedience should not mistake it for respect. Silence followed. Then the deputy stepped back. The first blow against the door cracked the chair leg. Lucy cried out. Ruth dragged the washstand across the floor and shoved it beneath the handle. The second blow split the doorframe. Caleb forced himself upright. Sweat appeared across his forehead. There is a revolver in the drawer, he said. No weapons, Ruth answered. If they enter, I cannot stop them. You can stay alive. Let me handle the rest. A scraping sound came from the window. Dr. Reed climbed back inside, breathing hard. Reverend Samuel Hale followed him, still wearing his dusty traveling coat. Behind the preacher came Mrs. Abigail Finch, the boarding house owner, holding a large iron skillet. I heard there was to be a wedding, Mrs. Finch said, and trouble. The preacher looked at the broken door. We may have time for one, he said, but not both. Another blow shook the frame. Reverend Hale opened his small black book. Where are the papers? Ruth placed them on the table. Mrs. Finch took Lucy's hand and led her to stand beside the bed. Caleb looked at Ruth. The letter. What about it? There is still time to read it before you take my name. Ruth looked at the blue envelope. Outside, Silas ordered the deputy to break the hinges. The preacher turned to Ruth. Ma'am, I need your answer now. Ruth picked up the letter. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Caleb's eyes held hers. If you open it, he said, you may refuse me. And if I do not, you may spend the rest of your life wondering what kind of man you married. The top hinge tore loose from the wall. Ruth broke the seal. Ruth unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The first line made the room fall away. Ruth, I knew your husband. Her eyes moved quickly across Caleb's careful writing. Daniel Caldwell had met Caleb 6 years earlier on a freight road outside Abilene. A flooded crossing had overturned Caleb's wagon and pinned him beneath it. Daniel had pulled him free, then stayed beside him through the night despite an injury to his own chest. Before they separated, Daniel had given Caleb $800 to invest in a piece of western land. He had planned to bring Ruth west once a proper house was built. The land Daniel helped purchase was now called Mercy Creek Ranch. Ruth stopped reading. Her hand lowered slowly. My husband's money bought your ranch. Caleb's face showed no surprise. He had been waiting for the anger. Part of it. You knew my name before I came to Cedar Hollow. Yes. You let me believe you chose me because I was useful. I chose you because Lucy trusted you and because I had watched the way you treated people, but I also knew who you were. The door shook again. A piece of wood fell from the frame. Ruth looked down at the letter. There was more written beneath the paragraph she had read, but the page would not stay steady in her hand. Why did Daniel never tell me? He meant to, Caleb said. Then he became ill. He was sick for nearly a year. You could have written. I did. Ruth stared at him. No letter came. I sent 3. The preacher raised his voice over another blow against the door. Mrs. Caldwell, whatever truth remains in that letter will still be there after the vows. The door may not. Ruth folded the page, but did not return it to the envelope. Her grief had changed shape in the space of a few breaths. For 4 years, she had believed Daniel left her nothing but unpaid bills and kind memories. Now she stood in a room above a boarding house, learning that part of a ranch in New Mexico had been built from a future he had planned for them. Caleb had known. He had carried that truth while asking for her hand. You should have told me before today, she said. Yes. You should have told me before asking me to become responsible for your child. Yes. His answer held no defense. That made her anger harder to hold. If I live, Caleb said, I will answer every question. If I die, the deed in Dr. Reed's case names you as part owner. It was prepared before the marriage agreement. Dr. Reed opened his leather bag and pulled out another folded paper. Ruth did not take it. Lucy stood beside the bed, her doll pressed beneath her chin. She was trying not to cry again. Ruth looked at the damaged door. Silas Crow had chosen the hour carefully. He expected a dying man, a helpless child, and a poor widow who could be frightened or bought. He had not expected them to become a family before he entered. Ruth slipped Caleb's letter into the pocket of her dress. Begin, she told the preacher. Reverend Hale stepped beside the bed and opened his book. The next strike broke the upper hinge. Mrs. Finch raised her iron skillet. Make it quick, Reverend. The preacher began the vows. Caleb spoke first. His voice faltered once, but his answer did not. I do. Ruth heard boots moving in the hall. She heard Silas order the deputy to stand aside. She heard wood splitting as someone forced a metal bar between the door and its frame. Then the preacher turned to her. Do you, Ruth Caldwell, take Caleb Mercer as your lawful husband? She looked at the sick man before her. He had hidden a truth from her, perhaps more than one. His ranch carried part of Daniel's lost dream, and his blue letter still held words she had not read. But beside him stood a frightened child who had done nothing wrong. Ruth placed her hand in Caleb's. I do. The door fell inward. Silas Crow entered first, followed by Deputy Warren and the lawyer with the leather case. Reverend Hale did not stop. He finished the blessing while Dr. Reed and Mrs. Finch signed as witnesses. Ruth took the pen next. Her hand trembled once before she wrote her new name. Ruth Mercer. Caleb signed last, pressing so hard that the pen tore the paper. For anyone who believes a promise matters most when keeping it becomes difficult, stay with Ruth's story. The truth inside Caleb's letter had only begun to surface. Silas crossed the room and seized the marriage paper. He read it, then looked at Ruth with open disgust. "You think ink makes you this child's mother?" "No," Ruth said. "Standing beside her will do that. The ink only makes it harder for you to pretend otherwise." Deputy Warren removed his hat. He looked uncomfortable. "The order describes the child as having no able guardian in the home," he said. "That is no longer accurate." "It was signed by a judge," Silas replied. "And I will return to that judge with the changed circumstances." Silas turned on him. "You were ordered to bring my niece." "I was ordered to protect a child, Mr. Crow. Dragging her from her father's sickbed while her lawful stepmother stands beside her may not look like protection." Lucy moved close to Ruth. Her small hand found Ruth's without asking. Silas noticed. Something bitter passed across his face. He placed the court order back inside the lawyer's case. "Very well, keep her tonight." Caleb watched him carefully. "She will be here tomorrow, too." Silas gave a thin smile. Then his eyes settled on the letter showing from Ruth's pocket. "So he finally told you about Daniel." Ruth's fingers closed around Lucy's hand. "Caleb told me enough." "No," Silas said. "He told you the part that makes him appear honorable." Caleb tried to rise. "Leave." Silas ignored him. He stepped close enough that Ruth could smell rain on his coat. "Before you call that man your husband," Silas said quietly, "ask him why Daniel Caldwell's final letter was found unopened in Caleb's desk." The room became still. Ruth turned toward the bed. Caleb's face had gone pale for a reason that had nothing to do with fever. Ruth did not ask Silas what he meant. She looked at Caleb. That was enough. His eyes dropped to the blanket, and in that small movement, Ruth found the answer she feared. The letter had existed. Caleb had seen it. He had kept it. Silas smiled, but there was no pleasure in it, only satisfaction. "Enjoy your wedding night," he said. Then he turned and walked out. The lawyer followed. Deputy Warren remained in the doorway a moment longer, his hat held against his chest. "I will report the marriage to the judge," he said. "Until another order is issued, the child stays here." He looked at Lucy, then at the broken door. "I am sorry for the manner of this visit." Mrs. Finch gave him a hard stare. Sorry men should learn to knock softer. The deputy lowered his head and left. When their footsteps disappeared down the stairs, Reverend Hale closed his book. Dr. Reed moved the fallen door against the frame and wedged the chair beneath it. Lucy still held Ruth's hand. Ruth wished she would let go. Not because she wanted distance from the child, but because the trust in those small fingers made every hidden truth feel heavier. "Mrs. Finch," Ruth said, "would you take Lucy downstairs for a little while?" Lucy looked up quickly. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." "Are you leaving?" The question came too fast. Ruth crouched before her. "I said vows in front of a preacher. I signed my name. I am not walking out of this house because a cruel man spoke one sentence." Lucy studied her face. "Then why do I have to go downstairs?" "Because your father and I need to speak about things that happened before you were born." Lucy turned toward Caleb. "Is it bad?" Caleb's voice was weak. "It is something I should have spoken of sooner." The child pressed her doll closer. Mrs. Finch offered her hand. "Come help me find a piece of pie that has been waiting all morning for someone brave enough to eat it." Lucy hesitated, then followed her from the room. Reverend Hale and Dr. Reed went with them. The broken door scraped shut. Ruth stood beside the window while Caleb lay silent behind her. Outside, Silas's polished carriage rolled through Cedar Hollow. Townspeople watched from porches and shop doors as it passed. He had come expecting to take a child. He had left a wound behind instead. Tell me, Ruth said. Caleb's breath caught. Daniel wrote to me 4 months before he died. And you did not answer. I answered. You did not open his letter. No. Ruth turned. Caleb looked smaller than he had during the wedding. His face was drawn with pain, but Ruth no longer knew which part came from his body and which came from memory. Why? I was angry. At Daniel. At myself. That is not an answer. Caleb closed his eyes. After he gave me the money, I promised him a share of the land. I promised we would build 2 houses near the creek. His for you, mine for the wife I thought I would have one day. You had not met Lucy's mother then. No. What happened? The first year was hard. Cattle died. The well caved in. I borrowed against the herd and nearly lost everything. Daniel wrote twice asking whether the land was safe. I told him it was. But it was not. No. Ruth's voice hardened. You lied to him. I did. The wind pressed against the cracked window. Caleb continued. By the time the ranch began to recover, Daniel had stopped writing. Then his final letter came. I knew from the hand that something was wrong. The writing was weak. I thought he had learned about the debt. I thought he was demanding his money back, money I did not have. So you put the letter in a desk. I told myself I would open it when I had an answer for him. But he died before you did. Yes. The quiet after that word felt endless. Ruth reached into her pocket and removed the blue envelope Caleb had written for her. She set it beside the bed. Where is Daniel's letter now? Caleb looked toward the narrow wardrobe. In the bottom drawer, beneath a red shirt. Ruth crossed the room. The drawer stuck halfway. She pulled harder until it opened with a sharp wooden scrape. Beneath the shirt lay a thin envelope, yellowed at the edges. Daniel's handwriting was on the front. Mr. Caleb Mercer, Mercy Creek Ranch, New Mexico Territory. Ruth knew every turn of those letters. She had seen the same hand on grocery lists, birthday notes, and a small card Daniel once left beside her sewing basket after an argument. Her thumb moved over his name. You kept it 6 years. I could not throw it away. But you could leave it closed. Caleb looked toward the ceiling. Cowardice can last longer than a man expects. Ruth broke the seal. The paper inside was covered with Daniel's uneven writing. She began to read standing beside the wardrobe, but after the first few lines, her knees weakened. She sat on the chair near the window. Daniel had not asked for money. He had not accused Caleb of dishonesty. He had written that he was sick and feared he would not live long enough to bring Ruth west. He asked Caleb to protect her share of the ranch if she ever came looking. He also asked for something Ruth did not expect. Daniel wanted Caleb to tell her the truth about the child he had left behind. Ruth stopped breathing. She read the sentence again. There is another person Ruth must know about. Her name is Emily. She is 12 years old and she is my daughter. The paper slipped in Ruth's hand. Caleb watched her in silence. You knew, she whispered. No. You had this letter for 6 years. I did not know what was inside. Ruth stood so quickly the chair struck the wall. My husband had a daughter. Caleb's face tightened with shock. Ruth, I swear to you, this is the first I have heard of her. Ruth read the final lines. Daniel had written the name of a family in Colorado, the Harpers. He said Emily lived with them near a mining town called Silver Ridge. Below that, in darker ink, he had added one last request. If Ruth ever learns the truth, tell her the girl has her eyes. Ruth lowered the letter. Outside the room, Lucy laughed softly at something Mrs. Finch said downstairs. The sound reached Ruth like a hand from another life. She had married a dying man to keep one child from being taken. Now, before the vows were an hour old, she had learned another child might be waiting somewhere beyond the mountains. And Daniel had died believing Caleb would tell her. Ruth read Daniel's letter 3 times. Each reading hurt in a different place. The first brought shock. The second brought anger. By the third, she could hear Daniel's voice behind the uneven words, tired and afraid, asking another man to finish the truth he had been too weak to speak himself. Emily was 18 now, if she was still alive. Ruth folded the letter along its old creases. "Why did Silas know you had this?" she asked. Caleb stared toward the broken door. "After the barn fell, he came to the ranch before Dr. Reed moved me into town. He said he wanted to discuss Lucy's future. He searched your things. I lost consciousness while he was there. When I woke, my desk was open. The letter had been moved." Ruth's fingers tightened around the paper. "He may know what is inside. The seal was unbroken when I found it. A careful man can open a letter without leaving much proof." Caleb had no answer. Footsteps approached in the hallway. Lucy appeared at the door with a plate of pie in both hands. Mrs. Finch stood behind her, watching Ruth with quiet concern. Lucy looked from the letter to Ruth's face. "Who is Emily?" Ruth's heart sank. "You heard us." "The floor has cracks," Lucy said. "Mrs. Finch says old houses hear everything." Mrs. Finch gave a small sigh. "I also said old houses should learn when to keep quiet." Lucy entered the room and placed the pie on the table. "Is Emily your child?" Ruth knelt before her. She was Daniel's daughter. "Your first husband?" "Yes." Lucy thought about this. "Does that make her your daughter too?" The question struck Ruth harder than Silas's threat. "I do not know," she admitted. "Does she have anybody?" "I do not know that either." Lucy's eyes lowered to her doll. Then somebody should find out. Ruth looked at Caleb. He had once asked her to marry him because he believed a child needed someone willing to stay. Now Daniel's letter had placed the same choice before her again, only this child was far away, and perhaps old enough to believe no one had ever searched for her. Caleb's breath suddenly caught. His whole body stiffened. Dr. Reed hurried into the room as Caleb pressed one hand against his injured side. Dark color spread beneath the bandage. "Everyone back," the doctor ordered. Ruth moved Lucy toward Mrs. Finch, then returned to the bed. Dr. Reed cut away the cloth. His face became grave. "The wound has opened inside," he said. Caleb's skin had turned cold beneath the fever sweat. "What can you do?" Ruth asked. "I can clean it and close what I find, but he will need to be held still. There is no time to move him." Caleb reached for Ruth's wrist. "Do not let Lucy watch." Ruth turned to Mrs. Finch. "Take her downstairs." Lucy resisted. "I want to stay with Papa." Ruth held her shoulders. "Your father needs you to be brave somewhere else. People always say that when they mean something bad might happen." Ruth could not lie to her. "Yes," she said softly, "something bad might happen, but Dr. Reed is here and I am staying beside him." Lucy's chin trembled. "You promised you would not leave." "I remember." The child wrapped both arms around Ruth's neck. It lasted only a moment, but something in Ruth changed while holding her. She had entered the room that morning as a widow with no family in the territory. Now one frightened girl believed her word could hold a household together. If this small promise has found a place in your heart, stay with Ruth. Some families are not born in peace. They are formed in the moment someone decides not to walk away. Mrs. Finch led Lucy downstairs. Reverend Hale returned with hot water and clean cloth. Dr. Reed poured whiskey over his instruments. Ruth sat beside Caleb and took his hand. His eyes struggled to remain open. "You should go," he whispered, "find Emily. You are still trying to give orders at your own deathbed. It is becoming a habit. Then break it." He almost smiled, but pain took the expression from him. "I failed Daniel." "Yes." Caleb's fingers weakened around hers. "I failed you." "Yes." I do not expect forgiveness. Good. His eyes opened wider. Ruth leaned closer. Forgiveness offered too quickly is often only fear wearing a kind face. I am angry with you, Caleb Mercer. I may remain angry for a long while. Dr. Reed prepared the needle. But I will not let your worst decision become the only truth about you. Caleb looked at her as though she had given him more mercy than he deserved. Ruth tightened her grip. Stay alive long enough to earn the rest. The doctor began. Caleb made no cry, but his hand crushed Ruth's fingers. Wind moved through the cracked window, causing the lantern to sway. Reverend Hale stood at Caleb's shoulders, speaking a prayer in a low voice. Time lost its shape. When Dr. Reed finally stepped back, his sleeves were wet and his face gray with strain. I have done what I can. Will he live? Ruth asked. He has survived the bleeding. The night will answer the rest. Caleb lay still, breathing faintly. Ruth remained beside him until darkness covered Cedar Hollow. Mrs. Finch brought Lucy upstairs, and the child curled in the large chair without removing her boots. Near midnight, Caleb opened his eyes. Ruth. She bent close. In the desk at the ranch, he whispered, there is a telegram form I never sent. Her stomach tightened. To whom? The Harpers in Silver Ridge. I wrote it after Daniel died, but I could not bring myself to ask what had become of the girl. Ruth closed her eyes. Another truth delayed by fear. Caleb struggled for breath. Send it now. Before Ruth could answer, someone knocked softly against the broken door. Mr. Bell, Cedar Hollow's telegraph operator, stood in the hallway holding a yellow message. This came from Silver Ridge, he said. It is addressed to Caleb Mercer. Ruth rose and took it. The message contained only 2 lines. The Harpers died last winter. EMILY left with a man claiming to represent Mercy Creek Ranch. Ruth looked toward Caleb. No one from Mercy Creek had been sent for Emily. At the bottom of the telegram was one final sentence. The man gave his name as SILASCROWE. Ruth read the telegram twice before the words became real. Silas Crow had found Emily. Worse, Emily had gone with him willingly, believing he represented Mercy Creek Ranch. Caleb tried to lift himself from the bed. Help me up. Dr. Reed pushed him back against the pillows. You nearly bled to death an hour ago. He has her, and you will be no use to anyone if you tear those stitches. Caleb looked at Ruth. Silas knows what Emily means to the ranch. Ruth held the telegram near the lantern. What does she mean? Caleb's eyes moved toward Lucy, asleep in the chair. He lowered his voice. Daniel's share was never legally mine. I kept it separate in the ranch records. If Emily is his acknowledged daughter, she may inherit everything that belonged to him. How much? Half the land along Mercy Creek. Ruth turned cold. The creek was the only reliable water source for miles. Without it, the rest of the ranch would be dry pasture and empty buildings. Silas did not want Emily because he cared about Daniel's daughter. He wanted her claim. He plans to make her sign it away, Ruth said. Or marry her to someone who will. Dr. Reed stopped packing his instruments. Would a signature from an 18-year-old woman be enough? If she believes the papers are harmless, Caleb replied. Silas has lawyers who know how to bury a theft beneath respectable language. Ruth looked again at the message. When was this sent? Mr. Bell checked the markings, 4 days ago. Silas could already have her in Cedar Hollow. No, Caleb said. He would not bring her here. Too many people saw him today. Then where? Crow House. Ruth had heard the name. Everyone in Cedar Hollow had. Silas owned a stone mansion north of the desert ridge, nearly 40 miles away. He used it during cattle sales and court sessions. The house had iron gates, hired men, and enough rooms to hide a person from curious eyes. Ruth folded the telegram. I am going there. Caleb's answer came at once. No. Ruth faced him. You are not strong enough to come. That does not mean you go alone. I will take Reverend Hale. The preacher shook his head. I will go, but two people walking to Silas Crow's gate will not make him surrender a girl he crossed a territory to collect. Then we do not ask him. Dr. Reed gave Ruth a concerned look. What are you planning? I am planning to learn whether Emily is there. If she is, I will speak to her. And if Silas refuses? Ruth slipped Daniel's letter into her pocket. Then I will show her this. Caleb caught her wrist. He will say it is false. Emily may recognize her father's hand. And if she does not? Ruth looked at the man she had married only hours earlier. Then I will tell her things only Daniel would have known. Caleb's grip weakened. What things? Her voice trembled, but she did not let it break. A lawyer may challenge paper. Silas may challenge land records, but he cannot invent the small truths of a man's life. Lucy stirred in the chair. Her eyes opened slowly. Are you leaving? Ruth crossed to her. For a little while. To find Emily. Yes. Lucy sat upright and pushed hair from her face. Then I am coming. No. She might be scared. That is why I need you here with your father. Lucy frowned. Papa has the doctor. He needs his daughter too. Caleb looked toward the window. Ruth understood his silence. He did not want Lucy near Crow House. He also feared she would wake and discover another person had disappeared from her life. Ruth knelt beside the chair. I will return before tomorrow night. You cannot promise that. The child's words were quiet and sharp. Ruth remembered what Lucy had said downstairs. People used bravery when they meant danger. Promises could become another kind of lie. You are right, Ruth said. I cannot promise the road or Silas Crow, but I can promise I will do everything in my power to come back. Lucy searched her face. Bring Emily too. I will try. That is not the same. No, Ruth said. It is the most honest answer I have. Lucy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key tied to a red thread. This opens Mama's music box. She placed it in Ruth's palm. Why are you giving it to me? Because Emily does not know you. She might think you are lying. Ruth looked at the key. What will this prove? Mr. Crow has the music box. Caleb turned toward them. What? Lucy's eyes filled with fear. He took it from the ranch when Papa was hurt. I saw him put it under his coat. Ruth's fingers closed around the key. Silas had not searched Caleb's desk only for Daniel's letter. He had taken something that belonged to Lucy's mother. Did the box contain anything? Ruth asked. Lucy nodded. A picture of Mama and Uncle Silas when they were young. There was another picture underneath it. Mama told me never to show anyone. Caleb stared at his daughter. What picture? Lucy swallowed. A baby in a white blanket. Outside, a horse moved beneath the boarding house window. Then another. Reverend Hale stepped to the curtain and looked down. His expression changed. Ruth, he said, you may not need to ride to Crow House. A closed carriage had stopped across the street. Silas was not inside. The driver climbed down and opened the rear door. A young woman stepped onto the muddy road. She wore a dark green traveling dress and carried a leather document case against her chest. Even from the upstairs window, Ruth could see her eyes. They were Daniel's eyes. The young woman looked up at the boarding house. Then Silas's lawyer stepped out behind her and pointed toward Ruth's window. Ruth knew Emily before the young woman reached the stairs. It was not only the eyes. It was the way Emily held her shoulders when afraid, straight and still, as if fear were something she could hide by refusing to bend. Daniel had stood that way whenever bad news arrived. Ruth slipped the brass key into her pocket and moved toward the broken door. Caleb caught her hand. "Do not let Silas's lawyer speak to her alone." "I won't. He may have told her anything." Ruth looked at him. "Then she deserves the truth from someone who has nothing to gain by lying." Caleb's expression tightened. He knew Ruth had reason to doubt whether he could be counted among such people. Before he could answer, footsteps climbed the stairs. The lawyer entered without knocking. His name, Ruth learned, was Mr. Vale. He wore a clean black coat and the patient smile of a man who believed every room already belonged to him. Emily stood behind him. Up close, she looked younger than 18. Dust marked the hem of her green dress. Her face was pale from travel, and one hand gripped the leather document case so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Mr. Vale nodded toward Ruth. "Miss Harper, this is the woman I mentioned." Emily studied her. "You are Ruth Caldwell." "Ruth Mercer now." The young woman glanced toward Caleb's bed. "So it is true, you married him today." "Yes." Mr. Vale stepped into the room. "Miss Harper has come to settle the matter of Daniel Caldwell's property." Caleb forced himself higher against the pillows. "She has come because Silas Crow deceived her." Emily's face changed. "Mr. Crow said you stole my father's land." Caleb did not answer quickly enough. Ruth saw the doubt deepen in Emily's eyes. "He did not steal all of it," Ruth said, "but he hid the truth about the debt, and he failed to open your father's final letter." Caleb looked at her, but Ruth kept her attention on Emily. The young woman blinked. "What letter?" Ruth removed Daniel's letter from her pocket. Mr. Vale moved at once. "That paper has no legal value." Ruth stepped back before he could reach it. "I did not say it did." Emily stared at the handwriting on the envelope. "May I see it?" Mr. Vale turned toward her. "Miss Harper, you were warned that these people might use false documents." Emily looked at him. "You told me my father left no letter." Mr. Vale's smile faded slightly. "I told you no verified letter had been presented." "That is not what you said." The room grew quiet. Ruth held out the envelope. Emily took it with both hands. The moment she saw Daniel's writing, her mouth opened, but no sound came. She traced the first line with one finger. Then she turned away from everyone and began to read. Lucy appeared in the hallway. Mrs. Finch stood behind her, one hand resting on the child's shoulder. Emily read slowly. By the time she reached the final lines, tears had fallen onto the page. "He knew about me," she whispered. Ruth felt her own grief rise. "Yes." "He wanted you to find me." "Yes." Emily looked up. "Did you know?" "Not until today." Mr. Vale cleared his throat. "This is painful, but it does not change the legal question. Daniel Caldwell's share of Mercy Creek Ranch belongs to his daughter. Miss Harper has agreed to transfer her claim to Silas Crow in exchange for protection and a permanent home." Ruth looked at the leather case. "The papers are in there." Emily held it closer to her chest. "I have not signed them yet." Mr. Vale's voice sharpened. "You agreed." "I agreed to read them." "You were brought here at considerable expense." Ruth watched Emily's face. The young woman had heard words like that before. Expense, duty, gratitude, words used to make a kindness feel like a chain. "Why did Silas send you here?" Ruth asked. "To identify Caleb Mercer and confirm that Daniel's land was taken." "Then why is Silas not with you?" Emily glanced at the lawyer. Mr. Vale answered for her. "Mr. Crow had urgent business." Ruth remembered the baby's photograph, hidden inside Lucy's mother's music box. She turned toward Lucy. "Bring me the key." Lucy stepped forward, confused. "I gave it to you." Ruth drew the brass key from her pocket and held it where Emily could see. Did Silas show you a music box? Emily's eyes widened. A blue one with silver flowers. Lucy made a small sound. That was Mama's. Mr. Vale took a step toward the door. This conversation is finished. Mrs. Finch blocked his path with the iron skillet still in her hand. No, she said, I believe it has finally become interesting. Ruth faced Emily. What did Silas tell you about the box? He said it belonged to my mother. Caleb's gaze moved sharply to Lucy. Emily continued. He said the photograph inside showed her holding me as a baby. Lucy shook her head. The woman in the picture was my mama. Emily turned to her. For the first time, the two girls truly looked at each other. Lucy had her mother's dark hair. Emily had Daniel's eyes. Ruth felt the pieces moving before she understood the whole shape. Where is the box now? She asked. Emily looked toward Mr. Vale. In his carriage. The lawyer's face had gone still. Ruth walked toward him. Silas did not bring Emily here to claim Daniel's share. Mr. Vale said nothing. He brought her because of the photograph. Caleb's voice was low. What is Silas afraid it proves? Lucy stepped closer to Emily. My mother said the baby was someone Uncle Silas wanted everyone to forget. Emily's face lost all color. Before anyone could speak, a gunshot cracked outside. The sound came from the street below. Mrs. Finch rushed to the window. The closed carriage was moving fast through Cedar Hollow, its wheels throwing mud against the storefronts. Mr. Vale shoved past her and ran for the stairs. Ruth reached the window in time to see Silas Crow driving the carriage himself. On the seat beside him sat the blue music box. And tied to the back was Caleb's ranch deed. The carriage disappeared beyond the last buildings of Cedar Hollow before Ruth reached the street. Mud covered the road. Townspeople stood frozen beneath shop awnings, staring after Silas Crow. Near the hitching rail, a frightened horse pulled against its rope. The gunshot had struck a wooden water barrel, leaving a clean hole through one side. Silas had fired into the air to clear his path. He had not meant to hurt anyone. He had meant to remind the town that fear usually moved faster than courage. Deputy Warren ran from the sheriff's office, fastening his coat. What happened? He took the Mercer deed and Lucy's music box, Ruth said. The box contains a photograph he is afraid of. The deputy looked toward the empty road. Which direction? North. Reverend Hale came down the boarding house steps carrying his hat. The north road divides at Miller's Crossing. One trail leads to Crow House, the other goes toward the rail station. Emily appeared behind him, with Daniel's letter held against her chest. He will choose the station. Ruth turned to her. How do you know? Mr. Vale said a train leaves Red Bluff before dawn. He told me we would return there after I signed the papers. Mr. Vale had vanished during the confusion. Ruth looked up and down the street. His horse was gone. He is riding to meet Silas, she said. Deputy Warren untied two horses from the rail. I can follow them, but I need a signed complaint. You saw him take property that did not belong to him. I saw a carriage leaving. A judge will ask whether I knew who held the reins and whether the deed was his to take. Ruth pulled Daniel's letter from Emily's hands and held it beside the marriage agreement Dr. Reed had carried downstairs. Then let the judge ask me. The deputy studied her. You have been Mrs. Mercer less than a day. That is long enough to know when someone is stealing from my family. Emily lowered her eyes. The word family had reached her too. Deputy Warren handed Ruth the reins of a gray mare. Can you ride? Better than Silas expects. I am coming, Emily said. Ruth shook her head. You have traveled for days. And I know where he plans to go. It may be dangerous. Emily's face tightened. Everyone has decided things for me because they believe fear makes me helpless. The Harpers decided I should never know my father's name. Silas decided I should sign away land I had never seen. Mr. Vale decided which questions I was allowed to ask. She stepped closer. I am done waiting in rooms while other people carry my life away. Ruth saw Daniel in her then. Not only his eyes, but his stubbornness. She helped Emily onto the second horse. Reverend Hale took a third. Deputy Warren led them north at a hard pace. The wet road shone beneath the late afternoon light. Hooves struck mud and stone as Cedar Hollow fell behind them. Wind pulled loose strands of Ruth's hair across her face, but she did not slow. At Miller's Crossing, they found fresh wheel marks leading west. Not toward the rail station. Toward an abandoned silver mine. Emily stared at the tracks. He changed his plan. No, Ruth said. He never intended to take you back to Red Bluff. The thought came cold and clear. Silas had brought Emily to Cedar Hollow because he needed her signature. Once she refused him, he no longer needed her nearby. He needed time to destroy every paper that proved her claim. The old mine road climbed into broken hills. Juniper trees leaned over the narrow trail. Ahead, a raven lifted from the rocks and vanished into the gray sky. They found the carriage half a mile from the mine entrance. One wheel had sunk deep into soft ground. The horses were gone. The blue music box lay open in the mud. Lucy's mother's photograph was missing. Emily jumped from her saddle and ran to it. The silver flowers had been crushed. One hinge hung loose, and rainwater had soaked the red velvet lining. Ruth knelt beside her. Inside the box, beneath the ruined lining, she saw a thin strip of paper. She pulled it free. It was not a photograph. It was a certificate of birth. The writing had faded, but the names remained clear. Emily Rose Caldwell. Father Daniel Caldwell. Witness Rebecca Crow. Below the witness line was a second name. Silas Crow. Emily covered her mouth. He knew from the beginning. Yes, Ruth said. Silas had not discovered Daniel's daughter by accident. He had witnessed the record himself. He had known Emily could inherit part of Mercy Creek Ranch, and he had waited until the Harpers died to bring her under his control. Deputy Warren examined the certificate. This is enough to stop any transfer until a court reviews the claim. Not if he burns the original ranch deed, Reverend Hale said. Smoke rose beyond the rocks. They ran toward it. At the entrance to the abandoned mine, Silas stood beside a small fire. Mr. Vale was with him. Caleb's deed lay open in Silas's hands. Emily stepped forward. Do not burn it. Silas looked at her without surprise. You should have signed when you had the chance. You told me Caleb stole from my father. He did. And what are you doing? Silas's expression hardened. Saving land that should never have belonged to an outsider's child. Emily flinched but remained standing. Ruth moved beside her. If Emily's courage has touched you, remember that strength is not the absence of fear. Sometimes it is simply choosing who gets to stand beside you when fear arrives. Deputy Warren raised one hand. Give me the deed, Mr. Crow. Silas looked toward the mine. Two saddled horses waited near the dark entrance. Mr. Vale moved first. He seized the deed from Silas and ran into the tunnel. Silas followed. Deputy Warren started after them, but a deep cracking sound rolled through the hill. Dust poured from the mine entrance. Reverend Hale pulled Emily back as a timber support dropped across the opening. Stones followed, filling the air with a heavy roar. When the dust cleared, the entrance was nearly sealed. From somewhere inside came Mr. Vale's frightened shout. Then Silas called Ruth's name. His voice no longer held command. It held terror. Mrs. Mercer, he cried through the fallen stones, help us, and I will tell you why Daniel Caldwell really came west. Ruth stood before the blocked mine and listened to Silas Crow breathe in the darkness. The fallen stones had left a narrow opening near the ground. Smoke from the small fire drifted through it, carrying the smell of wet earth and old timber. Deputy Warren knelt beside the opening. "How badly are you hurt?" Mr. Vale answered first. "My leg is trapped." Silas's voice came from farther inside. "I am not injured." Ruth looked toward the loose rocks above the entrance. One wrong movement could bring the rest of the hillside down. Reverend Hale touched her arm. "We need men from town." "By the time they arrive, the air inside may be gone," Deputy Warren said. Emily stood beside the ruined music box, holding the birth record beneath her coat to keep it dry. "What did he mean about my father?" Ruth knelt near the opening. "Silas, give us the deed." A bitter laugh came from inside. "You are in no place to make terms. You are buried in a mine. And you want something I have." Ruth heard paper moving against stone. The deed was still with him. Deputy Warren lowered his voice. "We can pull away the smaller rocks. If the top timber holds, we may open enough space for one man to crawl through." "And if it does not hold?" Emily asked. "Then no one inside comes out." Silas called again. Ruth Daniel Caldwell did not come west to build a ranch with Caleb. He came because of Emily. Emily's face changed. Ruth leaned closer to the opening. "Explain. Help me first." "No." Silas went quiet. Then Mr. Vale cried out in pain. "You said you would get us out." Silas answered with cold impatience, "Be still." Ruth recognized the old habit in his voice. Even trapped beneath a mountain, Silas believed fear belonged to everyone but him. She turned to Emily. "Do you want to hear this?" Emily's fingers tightened around the birth record. "I have waited my whole life to know why I was hidden." Ruth faced the opening again. "Speak, Silas." For a long moment, only dripping water answered. Then his voice came low through the stones. "Daniel met Rebecca before he married you. Caleb's late wife. Lucy's mother." Ruth looked toward Reverend Hale. He showed no surprise, only concern. Silas continued. "They were young. Daniel worked with a survey crew near my father's land. Rebecca believed she loved him. When she became with child, our father sent Daniel away." Emily took one step back. "No." Silas ignored her. "Rebecca gave birth in secret. The child was sent to the Harpers. Daniel returned months later and tried to take her. My father threatened to have him jailed for trespass and theft." Ruth's mind moved through Daniel's letter. "Emily is my daughter." Rebecca Crow had witnessed the birth. The hidden photograph had shown a baby in a white blanket. Caleb had married Rebecca years later. Lucy and Emily were not strangers. They were half-sisters. Emily pressed one hand against her mouth. "Rebecca was my mother." "Yes," Silas said. Lucy's small brass key seemed suddenly heavier in Ruth's pocket. "Why did Daniel never tell me?" she asked. "Because Rebecca begged him not to. She had been told the child would have a safe home if he stayed away. Years later, when she learned the Harpers had moved, she wrote to Daniel. He came west to find Emily." "And met Caleb," Ruth said. "He met Caleb because Caleb was courting Rebecca." The truth settled slowly. Daniel had not invested in Mercy Creek Ranch only to build Ruth a home. He had placed money where he could remain near Rebecca's family and continue searching for the daughter taken from him. Caleb may not have known the whole reason. But Silas had. "You used Emily's existence to control Rebecca," Ruth said. Silas did not deny it. "You let her believe the child was safe while keeping the truth hidden. My father made those decisions." "And after your father died?" Silence. That silence answered more honestly than words. Emily walked toward the opening. "You could have found me." Silas's voice softened, but not with kindness. "You were better where you were." You came for me only when you wanted my land. The land belongs to the Crow family. My mother was a Crow. You were raised by strangers. Emily's face hardened. So was I a stranger when you needed my signature? Silas had no answer. Ruth placed one hand on Emily's shoulder. The young woman was trembling, but she remained upright. Deputy Warren and Reverend Hale began removing small rocks from the lower edge. Ruth joined them. Mud filled her fingernails. Sharp stone cut her palm, but she kept digging. Emily knelt beside her. You do not have to save him. Yes, Ruth said. After what he did. Ruth pulled another stone free. Justice does not require us to become cruel. Emily looked at her for a long moment, then began digging too. The opening widened slowly. Inside, Mr. Vale groaned. I cannot feel my foot. Deputy Warren pushed his arm through the gap. I can reach him if we move one more stone. Reverend Hale examined the timber above. This one is carrying most of the weight. Ruth saw the problem. The deed lay just inside the opening, beyond Mr. Vale's trapped leg. Silas stood farther back near the two horses. He had placed the paper where they could see it, where they would have to enter to retrieve it. Silas, Ruth said, slide the deed toward us. No. You have told the truth. That may help you in court, but only if you stop fighting us. I will not surrender Mercy Creek. It was never yours. The sound of a horse shifting came from inside. Then Emily saw what Ruth had missed. He is going deeper into the mine. Deputy Warren lowered himself toward the opening. There may be another exit. Silas's voice came from the darkness. There is. Mr. Vale began to shout. You cannot leave me here. A horse's hooves struck stone. Ruth pushed her arm through the opening, reaching for the deed. Her fingers touched its edge. At that moment, the supporting timber cracked. Reverend Hale shouted for everyone to move. Ruth grabbed the paper and pulled back as the entrance collapsed again. A roar filled the hillside. Emily covered her head. Deputy Warren dragged Ruth away from the falling stones. Dust rolled over them, thick enough to hide the sky. When it cleared, the opening was gone. Mr. Vale's cries had stopped. Ruth looked down at the paper in her hand. It was not the ranch deed. It was a signed transfer, giving every acre of Daniel Caldwell's land to Silas Crow. At the bottom was Emily's name, and the signature looked exactly like hers. Emily stared at the signature on the transfer. That is not mine. Ruth held the paper closer to the fading light. The letters leaned the same way Emily's did, but the ink looked older than the rest of the document. Silas copied it from something you signed before coming here. Emily's face tightened. The hotel register in Red Bluff. Deputy Warren took the paper. A forged transfer will not survive a hearing, but we need Silas alive to answer for it. A faint knock came from beneath the collapsed stones. Mr. Vale was still alive. Reverend Hale pressed his ear to the ground. There must be air reaching him from another passage. The deputy looked toward the ridge. Old mines often had ventilation shafts. If Silas knew another way out, we may find one above. They followed the hill around as evening settled over the rocks. Ruth's cut palm throbbed, and dust filled her boots, but she kept moving. Emily walked beside her, carrying the birth record beneath her coat. On the far side of the ridge, they found a narrow opening hidden behind dead brush. Fresh hoof marks led out. Silas had escaped, but only one horse had passed through. Mr. Vale remained trapped. Deputy Warren entered the passage with a lantern. Reverend Hale followed. Ruth and Emily waited in the cold until they heard voices inside. Nearly an hour later, the men emerged carrying Mr. Vale between them. His leg was badly injured, but he was breathing. The lawyer looked at Emily. I wrote the transfer, he said. Deputy Warren lowered him onto a blanket. You can explain that to the judge. Mr. Vale shook his head. Silas promised me land. He said no one would question the signature once the original deed was gone. Ruth crouched beside him. Where did he go? To Mercy Creek. Why? To burn the ranch records. They rode through the night. When Mercy Creek Ranch appeared beneath the first gray light of morning, smoke was already rising from the yard. Silas stood beside the record shed, with a burning lantern in his hand. Caleb was on the porch. He could barely stand. Dr. Reed supported him beneath one arm, while Lucy clung to the other. Ruth jumped from her horse. What are you doing out of bed? Caleb looked at her with a tired smile, breaking another doctor's order. Silas raised the lantern. No closer. Deputy Warren drew his revolver, but kept it pointed toward the ground. Put it down. Silas looked from the deputy to Emily. This ranch came from Crow land and Crow water. Emily stepped forward. It came from my father's money and my mother's silence. For the first time, Silas looked uncertain. Lucy left the porch and walked toward Emily. In her hands, she carried the cloth doll with one missing button eye. You are my sister, Lucy said. Emily's face broke. She knelt as Lucy placed the doll in her arms. Silas stared at the two girls. Whatever power he had once held over Rebecca's secret was gone. The truth now stood before the whole yard in morning light. Caleb moved down one porch step. The records are not in that shed. Silas turned. Caleb held a thick ledger against his chest. I removed them after you searched my desk. You planned this, Silas said. No, I finally learned from my mistakes. He looked at Ruth. I spent years protecting land while failing the people it belonged to. I will not do that again. Caleb opened the ledger and removed a signed deed. This transfers Daniel Caldwell's full share of Mercy Creek to Emily Rose Caldwell. No conditions, no debt, no claim from me. Ruth understood what he was giving away. Half the creek. Half the best grazing land. Perhaps half the future of the ranch. Silas laughed once. You will ruin yourself. Maybe, Caleb said, but I will not steal security from one child to provide it for another. Emily rose slowly. I do not want to take Lucy's home. You are not taking it, Caleb said. You are receiving what your father meant you to have. Ruth stepped beside him. We will find a way to share the water and work the land together. Caleb looked at her. You are still willing to stay. Ruth took his trembling hand. I told you forgiveness would not come quickly. I remembered. But a man who gives up half his ranch to correct an old wrong has begun earning it. Silas lowered the lantern. Deputy Warren crossed the yard and took it from him. By noon, Silas Crow was riding back to Cedar Hollow in irons. Mr. Vale's confession, the forged transfer, the birth record, and the stolen deed ended every claim Silas tried to make. Months later, a territorial judge confirmed Emily's ownership and named Ruth the guardian of Daniel's share until Emily completed the ranch accounts herself. Caleb recovered slowly. He never regained all his strength, but he lived. By spring, 2 houses stood near Mercy Creek. Caleb, Ruth, and Lucy lived in one. Emily chose the smaller house across the cottonwood grove, close enough that Lucy ran between them every morning without bothering to knock. One evening, Ruth found Caleb beside the creek, holding the unopened blue letter he had written before their wedding. You never finished reading it, he said. She opened it. The final lines held no new secret. Caleb had written that if he survived, he would release Ruth from the marriage rather than ask her to live beside a man she could never trust. Ruth folded the letter and placed it in his hand. Burn it. He looked at her. Why? Because I am not here from duty anymore. Lucy's laughter carried from the cottonwoods. Emily stood near the second house, hanging a blue music box from a repaired shelf. Caleb touched Ruth's scarred palm. the one cut while she dug to save a man who had tried to destroy them. If this story has stayed with you, remember the courage at its heart. Truth may arrive late, but one honest choice can still change an entire family. Ruth rested her head against Caleb's shoulder as sunset turned Mercy Creek to gold. She had married a man expecting to bury him. Instead, he survived, surrendered half of everything he owned, and gave two sisters the home that fear had denied them. The frontier remembered Caleb Mercer as the cowboy who returned land he could have kept. But Ruth remembered something greater. He had finally learned that love was not proven by holding on. Sometimes it was proven by opening one's hand.